So good afternoon everyone. Pragyan 21, powered by Autodesk, co-sponsored by Times Now, is back with its next esteemed guest. Its guest is the series Illumináre. We would like to thank our English journal partner, Free Press Journal, our online news partners, News Karnataka and The Statesman, our online media partner, the Campus Media, and our Kannada news partner, Vartha Bharati, for their invaluable assistance.
Today, I, Sangeeta, and my co-host Rishabh warmly welcome you all to the third installment of Illuminate. We have with us Mr. Ken Yeang, pioneer architect in ecology-based architecture, planner, and author, best known for his eco-structures that fully embrace the green belt. Mr. Yang, who started his valued works as early as in the 70s, is one of the founding figures of bioclimatic skyscrapers, vertical green urbanism, and sustainable designs. It came as no surprise when he was named one of the 50 people who could save the planet by the Guardian newspaper. Sir, as an aspiring architect, I find all of your works revolutionary, yet much needed in these times. We are thankful to you for agreeing to join us on our live events. We welcome you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you. I'm going to talk today about designing the ideal built environment, which I call the ecotopia. It's basically a nature-based approach based on the science of ecology. Now, ecologists see the Earth covered by this thin film called the biosphere. Within the biosphere, there are the biogeochemical cycles, there's energy, material resources, and of course, there are units in nature called the ecosystems. The ecosystem consists of communities of plants and animals. Ecologists refer to these as the biological constituents and the physical constituents. Now, within nature, there is human beings, which is part of the community of plants and animals, but we're different because we're the most powerful of all species in nature because we're able to change the landscape, we're able to change the ecology of the land, change waterways, change the seas and composition and the aquatic life, and now we've changed the climate. Then the physical constituents includes our built environment, which is abiotic, and the built environment isn't just buildings, but actually everything that human beings make, which is cities, urban areas, structures, transportation systems, artifacts, and food, and so forth. So now, in a diagram, our built environment takes in inputs from the biosphere and gives us outputs of energy, materials, and so forth. And that the inputs consist of energy, materials, water, food, people. The built environment has impacts over its entire life, which is the first environmental impact, the operational impact, the end impact, and gives out outputs of energy, materials, people. The built system itself, at the end of its useful life, becomes an output, and these have to be either reused, recycled, reconstituted, or reintegrated. Otherwise, we'll just collect in the biosphere. Now, what has happened in the Earth now is that there is ineffective biointegration of our built environment with the biosphere. With the ineffective biointegration comes the contamination of the environment, the inability of nature to sequester the emissions they make out, and this has resulted in a devastation to our natural world. Everything depends on effective biointegration. So whatever we do, there is similarity with what in medical sciences with the design and development of prosthetic devices. Prosthetic device is something that is artificial, it is synthetic, it is human-made, and in prosthesis it's attached to a host organism, which is the whole human being. Then everything depends on effective biointegration. Now, by analogy, our built systems are prosthetic devices. It is artificial, it is synthetic, it's human-made. So what is equivalent in the host organism? That's very simple. That's the Earth itself. So everything then depends on effective biointegration between the built systems and the biosphere. If it's ineffective, then it causes environmental impairments. And so this is the idea that I had, which is the basis for all our work, is that what happens if our built environment is built to emulate and to replicate ecosystems, to become human-made ecosystems. This is the challenge of ecological design. If we're able to achieve this, then there won't be any environmental impairment. Of course, this is easier said than done. This is what we must all strive to do, is to redesign our built environment to emulate and replicate ecosystems. So then I started to look at what are the properties of ecological systems that we need to emulate. So here's a list of them. It's not a complete list, but it's the key attributes, which is biological structure of ecosystems, biodiversity, connectivity and nexus, provision of ecosystem services, biointegration, responsiveness to climate, use and cycling of materials, hydrology, symbiosis, homeostasis, food production, and ecological succession. So I'm going to go through some of these and show how we try to interpret this in our work. The first one is ecosystems biological structure. Now, this was discussed earlier on. If you look at this ecosystem, it has communities of plants and animals and a physical environment. Now, if you look at the room that you're in, the building that you're in, the city that you're in, then everything is mostly abiotic, inorganic. There's very little biotic constituents. So if we were to design buildings as constructed ecosystems, then we must have a full complement of both. So I started looking at different ways we can bring the biotic constituents back into the built environment. You can put it in the first diagram in a centralized way. You can have a dispersed pattern as in the second one. You can have a stepping stones, which is connected but not quite connected, but close to each other. And then the third is the continuous ecological corridor and ecological fingers. Now, from ecological point of view, this is the most preferred because it is continuous. By being continuous and linked, there is a greater pool of natural resources to be shared among the species, and that by being able to, by being connected enables species interaction, and by enabling species interaction, it engenders a much more biodiverse ecosystem, and by being diverse, it's much more stable. So this is the preferred pattern. So with this, I'll start looking how we can interpret this by design in our built environment, in our buildings. So this is one of the early buildings I did. I designed where we had continuous vegetation starting from the ground, from the basement, moving up to the top of the building in a spiraling pattern. So this is what the plan looks like. The vegetation on the outside and is continuous as a ramp going up the building. And that, the whole idea was that as the ramp reaches the same level as the adjoining building's roof, you would then bridge over and then vegetate the roof. So in this way, this becomes the catalyst to making the whole city green. And so this was an idea which was never quite implemented, but that was the principle of that project. The next is to look into ecosystems biodiversity. Now, a built environment is a very low ecosystem biodiversity because it's just us human beings and very small species such as cockroaches, rats, and little animals. And so I started to look at different parts of the earth and its biodiversity, and you notice the biodiversity is highest near the equator, and it gets increasingly less as you go above in the latitude towards the 70s. So the approach then is to create habitats within the built environment. Habitats could be green walls, green structures, green terraces, green atriums, green areas on the ground, and so forth. And so this is the approach that we adopt, whenever we design, is to create habitats within buildings. So now, to illustrate this is the project that we recently completed about a year ago. Is in Putrajaya, the capital city of Malaysia. And these are the habitats where we located within the building, on the walls, the sky courts, on the ground, and on the edges of the building. Then we produce what we call a biodiversity matrix, which is that building on the left-hand side, in which we identify all the habitats on the upper axis, and like these. And then the next is to try and identify species of fauna that we want to bring back into the site. And then from once we identify the fauna endemic for that locality that we want to bring back to the site, we identify flora that will attract the fauna. And then from there, we look at the integration between the habitats and the species. And from there, we use these as a basis for the landscape design and design of the habitats. So in a nutshell, this is our approach to increasing the biodiversity of the locality and to balance it, to balance the biotic with the abiotic. Now, you look at some of my buildings, it's just an intention, an indication what could be achieved, because it's very difficult to persuade clients to let us do this in an absolute thorough way. Now, this is the building. There it is in that white square, and it's by the waterfront, and it's in the bridge, and it's linked close to the Prime Minister's office on the far right. In between, we located a promenade, and the promenade lies in access right to the Millennium Monument by the waterfront, which was also designed by us, about 8 years back. Here you are. Here's the master plan showing our two buildings, which is almost symmetrical chevron-shaped buildings from the square going down to the monument at the bottom. And the monument is next to the Ministry of Finance buildings, designed by another architect, friend of mine. This is a promenade between two buildings. We put seating areas that people can sit and relax. And then the facade is a double-skin facade where we experiment with the use of fritted glass panels as an alternative to our horizontal louvers. So now this is the pattern. We want to give it a facet the facade, and then we slice it to make it more porous. And the pattern we use is the cultural pattern of the Malay community. This is from the inside. The first image is the outside, which is the fritted glass, which is about, the fritted pattern is about 50% clear and 50% opaque. And then the second image shows what it looks like from the walkway between the outer skin and inner skin. And the third shows the structural support for the facade. The energy index is about 136.118 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum, compared to a conventional building, which is 210. So by all means and purposes, these figures and studies show that the fritted glass works as a substitute to the horizontal louvers. On the west side, we wanted to protect the west side from the hot western sun. And because the building isn't exactly east-west, we angled the facade so that to face the sun. The holes, the horizontal slots you see are actually the sky courts, and people can go out to the sky courts to look out, and that the sky courts, well, these are not fully planted. You see a lot of vegetation. You should see a lot of vegetation in these sky courts. We also brought the vegetation all the way from the third floor down to what we call the Ecocell. The Ecocell is an idea we developed a few years earlier. This is our master plan for the Kowloon waterfront. And these are the Ecocells that we cut in the podium going all the way down to the waterfront. And and these are actually voids that go from the top of the podium down to the waterfront. It integrates vegetation down to the lowest floor, provides opportunities for rainwater harvesting and collection, and provides natural ventilation to lower floors. It brings daylight, and also at the bottom we can put an eco machine or a biosphere. So this was the Ecocell idea, and we implement this in the earlier building. And so this is the Ecocell right at the bottom. We bring it down to the ground. And here you can see the vegetation from the third floor in a spiraling ramp going down to the basement. Now, the next is ecosystem connectivity and nexus. What is evidently clear is that everything in nature is connected and that you cannot artificially partition all of the built environment or human society or one species or one locality from the other. As for instance, that COVID has indicated that you can the protection from COVID um, uh, infections actually has to be an international global effort. So how do we connect nature? How we enhance connect nature? Because human beings fragment nature. Human beings chop up nature into pieces. And so one of the ways we try to do is to bring this ecological network uh, as uh, as a spiraling series of planters that goes all the way up to the roof. And we should actually connect not just at the ground floor, but also vertically, all the way up to the top of the building. And so for this building, which is in Singapore, uh, we put the planters on the outside of the facade, as you can see in this diagram. The idea with this time, we put a walkway so that you can service the planters without going through the internal areas. And here it is, this build. You can see the planters, you can see the walkway, you can see the sun shading, and the glass facade at the back. And this, for every facade, we climb up, one floor, and we call this a linear vertical park. And that, if you stretch it out, it's 1.3 kilometers long. And so this is how the linear park looks like. You can see the walkway, and that this is the walkway that spirals up the building. And then at the corners, we punctuated with sky courts. And so these are the two sky courts at the corners of the building, and that the sky courts bring daylight, bring vegetation, and so the linear park then opens out into these sky courts as it reaches the corner. And these are obviously provide spaces for people to eat and to drink and to have a cigarette if they wanted to. And so this is I call this the mini plazas at the sky courts at the edges of the building. The building actually consists of two components, but at the mid level I have a roof garden, and this is the mid level roof garden, and the top is the roof garden itself with a panoramic view of the surrounding. Now, the green index required in Singapore is 6. That means the ratio of greenery off the ground with the green in the building. But here we achieved 12.2, so we far exceeded the green index, which is required by the authorities. But the building is actually two components, A and B, linked by an atrium. And the atrium, the two blocks are linked by a bridge. This is the atrium between the two blocks, and above the atrium is an operable glass louvered roof, which is open in most times of the day so that hot air can go out. But if it rains, it has automatic sensors so that it shuts and is closed to keep the rain out. And then the two blocks are linked by a bridge, as you can see in the bottom right-hand diagram, right-hand plan, and the bridge links the two blocks together. And then we have a number of experiments in this building. One of the experiments is what we call a diagonal light shaft, which then cuts all the way down to the bottom of the building. You see at the top of the light shaft, it opens out into the atrium, and from bottom looking up, you can see the atrium roof, and looking down, you can actually see the street. And this is the simulation of the lighting conditions within the building. It just shows that our plan is not that effective in natural daylight because I have deep floor areas to maximize the plot ratio. This is looking up towards the atrium. And then the Ecocell that you saw in the other building, we did the same thing with this building, and this is where the Ecocell is, and this is Ecocell going all the way down to the basement. Now, how do you do this with a high-rise building? And so this is one of the buildings that is now under construction. It is the Skylon building, and that we start by looking at the biodiversity around the site. The site's that red dot you can see there, and then we look at we study the species in that area, And we concluded that one of the ways to do this is to create vertical habitats in the building and to use it to attract birds and butterflies and insects. So the lower floors, we call it the butterfly zone and the dragonfly zone. The middle is for the birds, songbirds, and the top is for migratory birds. And so this is the biodiversity matrix for the entire building, which is the vertical biodiversity matrix. So that was how we adopted the idea, the biodiversity matrix idea, to a vertical building instead of a medium-rise or low-rise building. Now, the next property of the ecosystem that we need to emulate attribute is the provision of ecosystem services. What are ecosystem services? Ecosystem services are services that nature provides for us without any human intervention. Nature does this for us for free. Nature produces oxygen. Nature has the maintains the biological and genetic biodiversity. It purifies water and air. It provides storage, cycling of global distribution of fresh water. It regulates the chemical composition of the atmosphere. It maintains the migration and nursery habitats for wildlife, and so forth. All these are done by nature without human intervention. So we need to try and emulate this if we can in our constructed ecosystem. Then it became clear to me that it is such a massive task, it's impossible to do this technologically. And so what we try to do is to say, okay, we try and use as much technology as we can to emulate it, like this building in which we emulate the production, photosynthesis, and production of energy. And nature sequesters and detoxify the emissions that we we discharge into the environment. But what is clear is that we cannot do this 100%. Nature is too big, too vast, too capable to do this. But what we have done is that we've done the opposite. We have emitted more gases than nature is able to emulate, that nature is able to sequester. Because of this is the cause of contamination of the biochemical cycles, and this is the cause of climate change. And so I started looking ways to how we can emulate the production of ecosystem services. So the idea was to have nature-augmented solutions by weaving green strips between a built area and the green area and the ecological corridor. So this is the idea. The white represents the urban areas, the green represents the built areas, and we try and bring the two together in a series of ecological fingers. And so this is represented, this diagram, where we have continuous vegetation with corridors and fingers, and we put fingers and corridors into the city. And so this is what the master plan looks like. You can see the urban areas as fingers going up from the hills, going down, and then from the left-hand side is the ecological corridor along the waterfront, and then a series of fingers that goes into the city. So then the green fingers are close enough to the urban areas to provide ecosystem services into the built area. And so we cannot replicate ecosystem services, but we augment the urban areas with ecosystem services, with green areas. So this is what the master plan looks like. You can see the white, which is the urban areas, and then here we try and weave the two together like clasp hands. And our design is about 30 meters between each of the fingers and 20 meters wide for the ecological fingers, 30 meters for the urban areas. And so that was the approach to try and to provide ecosystem services into the built environment. Now, the ecosystem biointegration, what is clear is that our present approach is inadequate because if you look in the city that you're in, it has an existing infrastructure which is not green. So then what green architects do is to build green buildings onto the existing, to attach to the existing infrastructure. And obviously, some of these green buildings are autonomous; they can exist without the infrastructure, but most of them still need the infrastructure as a supplement. So the proposition is that what happens? We start with the green infrastructure, and then it makes the green city much more easier to produce. And so that means what it means is that if you were to be a green architect, or we are to be green architect, a green planner, then we must start with the green infrastructure first. We make our infrastructure first. Then all the buildings that we put in is much easier to make this into a green city. So this is a different level of thinking. That if I were to leave one idea in your head when you leave this lecture, is that start with the green infrastructure. Design the infrastructure, the electrical system, the water supply system, the energy, the sewage system, and the IT system to make it green before we start working on the green buildings. So I started to think that maybe the key infrastructures is nature, which itself is infrastructure. That is human society, our social, economic, political, and educational institutions is an infrastructure. And then there's water. Although water is part of nature, I've taken this out because water is what life is all about, and water, the hydrological cycle, is infrastructure. And then there's our built environment, which is two levels infrastructure, which is external as well as internal within the buildings. And ecological design then is the integration of all these four together into a whole. Now, this is a diagram of aspiration. To effectively achieve this is extremely difficult, and this is what we must all do as ecological architects and planners. Of course, if you can, if you so lead and list this out, then it is a lot of things to be done. Now, this is a scheme that we designed in Bangalore, where a development is right next to the forest reserve. The approach is to start with the ecological spine along the forest reserve to collect all the species, then to bring it through the site in a series of ecological fingers, and to connect to other sites so that we can extend the connectivity, the ecological nexus, to surrounding sites. So this is the master plan. You can see the spine on the left-hand side, and then we brought it through to the edge of the site and to surrounding areas. And this is the green infrastructure. So for master plans, we start with the green infrastructure before we do anything else. And then from there, we lay the roads. We call it the green infrastructure, where all the utilities are located. And then there is the water infrastructure, which is where the drainage, the water supply. And then from there, we have the red human society is the walkways, pedestrians, and it's the green areas and the buildings. And so then following this comes the ecosystem hydrology, where we try and close the loop as much as we can within the built environment. And then with anything that's charged the outside, we bring back to the ground in different ways, as you can see on the right-hand side, through rain gardens, through infiltration bioswales, and so forth. So then for the black water, we have a series of ponds, which is what are called constructed wetland, so that the black water, the sewage, is treated without using mechanical means. Then the third property is ecosystems responsive to climate. We have to design in relation to climate. This is called Biochromatic Design, and that if you can see in the world, there are a variety of climatic zones which affects the ecology of the locality. The climate determines the ecology of the locality to a very large extent. So now, what you have in a cold climate is a cold winter and a hot summer. So you can see the blue line, but the red line indicates what energy engineers do for us. They want us to have a consistent indoor temperature and air change and fresh air intake throughout the whole year. But it's a high energy solution. So the designing for low energy means you have to start with bioclimatic approach, where we shape the building, as you can see by the right-hand side, orientate the building properly. We design the facade and the closure system, optimize ambient energies, and use natural ventilation as much as possible. But what is clear is that with the white line, you cannot match the red line. You can improve on the blue line, improve on external conditions. And then you can, if you use some partial mechanical systems like ceiling fans, exhaust fans, then you can increase it. You can increase the comfort level a bit more, and the amount of energy that's used. And so I call this mixed mode because it's not full mode as the red line. And then you can have productive mode where you try and use renewable energy. And then the red mode is the red line is the full mode. But if you look into the seasons, you have a very cold season, a hot season in the temperate climate, and then you have the mid season, which is spring and autumn, as mid seasons, which is the comfort condition is quite pleasant in the mid season. So the low energy approach is to try and extend the mid season as much as possible. So reduce the need for air conditioning in the summer and reduce the need for heating in winter. And to do this, we can have a number of ways. One of the ways is to create a flue in the building so that it sucks the air out during the mid-season. This is the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital extension that we did back in 2010. We created a flue on the outside of the building, and then it sucks up the air from the lower 3 floors to reduce energy consumption. So there's a valve in the lower floors and the upper parts of the building. So this is the lower floors of the building. It sucks the air up to the ceiling during the mid-season. By doing so, it increases lowers the ambient temperature and the use of energy in winter and in summer. Then we start to look at how we can shape the buildings to lower energy consumption. So now if you have a tower, you can have the core either at the center of the building, at the sides, or at the north and south, just different orientation of the building. And that by locating the cores on the east and west side, it reduces the thermal energy, solar energy into the building on the east and the west sides, especially in the tropics. So you can see the sun path in the middle of this diagram. And so with this building, what we did was we put the core on the east side and the west side. We put planters on the edge of the building. But another idea we had is what happens if we have a canopy building? So a canopy is like an umbrella. You can move. In fact, the umbrella is an ideal cybernetic canopy because it keeps out, where if the sun is on whichever direction of the sun, you angle the twist umbrella to keep out the sun or the wind or the rain. And so my ideal is to design a building as an umbrella building where the umbrella itself is operable. I haven't been able to do this yet, but I hope to do this sometime, if I have the opportunity. This is the university hub that we designed, where we use the same fitted glass idea as an umbrella over the university hub, so people can walk from one part of the building without getting wet. And this is the house that we did back in 1985, where the umbrella became a louvered roof. And this lets in the morning sun and keeps out the afternoon sun, and is perforated so that the ventilation can go through the building. This is the plan of the building. This is the center route goes through the building. This is the staircase going up to the top of the building. It uses up about 42 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum. This is another umbrella building we designed in China. It is a station, and here it is, looking from the southwest. This is the floor plan of the station, and symbiosis is where one species and another species live in harmony. And at the same time, we look into how, in this diagram, we look into how we can reuse, recycle, reconstitute materials. And these are the characteristics of what we call the ideal eco-city. All with a summary of all those factors that I presented earlier on. Now, I haven't completed everything that is there. I haven't been able to design to complete the entire attributes of the ecosystem in a white square of those items which are still outstanding. And so I hope to do this, within the next period of time from today, in as much as I can. Now I'm going to end in a minute. These are the four basic infrastructures: the green infrastructure, the green infrastructure, the blue infrastructure, red infrastructure. Now, assuming that you and I are able to design the ideal built environment, we're able to reconnect and build this as the constructed ecosystem. But the last infrastructure is us as human beings, because we cannot control human beings, not all the human beings, 100%, 100% of the time. So what happens if human beings don't behave? What happens if we misuse our planet? We use our infrastructure. We misuse. We have, unsatisfactory, non-sustainable habits. So then everything depends on us as human beings. So ecological design isn't just designing buildings. Us as human beings have to change. We have to adapt ourselves to a much more ecological way of life. So I'm going to end my next lecture now, and those are the key factors in ecological design.
Thank you, sir. That was very insightful. And I hope all of your interventions become reality one day.
Right.
So now we'd like to go into a few questions.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, sir. So,
Yes.
sir, you received your PhD from Cambridge University back in the 1970s. So there were no CAD or other software tools back then. So how was your experience as a student, and how do you think the field has changed since that time?
Could you repeat your last two sentences again?
Okay, sir. So back in 1970s, when you had completed your education, sir, so there were no CAD tools and other sophisticated softwares. So how was your experience as a student, and how do you think the field has changed since then?
Oh, I left Cambridge back in 1976.
Yes, sir.
There was no engineering support, absolutely none. I had to do everything myself, which was very slow, very tedious, and I had limited capability to do it. And so I thought the easiest way to start is to design passive, low-energy buildings. So that's how I got started into Biocromatic Design. This is back in 1976. And it wasn't until 2015, 20 years later, around the 90s, that a lot of people just jump up and say, oh, we have to do something about the environment. And then the engineers go into sustainability, and the architects go into sustainability. And so it wasn't until the 90s that I had engineering support. So for nearly 15 to 20 years, it was, it was like in a twilight zone. I had to do everything by myself. And so from the 90s onwards to the current day, every architect say they do green design. Some to a great extent of authenticity, and some less so. But I'm very glad that this is happening. But it is not enough.
Yes,
You
sir.
look at your schools of architecture. How many schools of architecture teach ecology? Maybe about half a dozen. And so your curriculum has to change. For instance, teaching materials. Your teachers, when you teach you materials, they teach you how they weather, how they are constructed, how they put together. But they don't teach you about what happens, how you extract materials from the ground, fabricate the materials, and the energy that is used, the waste that is produced, and what happens at the end of its useful life of materials, and whether they can be recycled and reused rather than go into the public dump. And so the whole teaching of materials has to change. Whole teaching of energy and mechanical electrical systems have to change. You have to change the curriculum of universities. So this is what I think that should be happening. Now, I was brought up, when I did my doctorate, and I went to study ecology. But how many architects today understand ecology? So the whole architecture profession has to change, has to learn ecology. And you look at my generation of architects, then I almost given up on them because none of them, very few of them understand ecology. And so it is you as the next generation that has to lead the drive for a sustainable future. And you have to start now. You cannot start when you graduate. You cannot start later on. You have to, by yourself, accept the fact that we have to do something about the built environment. We have to do something about the impacts of what we do on nature, and that we have to study ecology. We have to study design in an ecological way. So your schools have to teach how to do this. Your teachers have to encourage you to do this, and you yourself must start doing that. Now, one of the things you need to do is to live in a much more sustainable way. How many shirts do you have? You probably have half a dozen to a dozen shirts. I only have, maybe about 6 to 7 shirts, maybe some casual shirts and some work shirts, and that's it. I don't, buy unnecessary things. Yesterday, I was at a client's office, and she said to me, "Why don't you buy one of these paintings?" And I said, as an ecologist, I don't buy anything that I cannot use. A painting will give you pleasure, that's fine, but I don't need that many of them. So never buy things that you cannot use. Then I tell my staff, never buy any food in a container in which the container has a longer life than your food. Because if you drink Coke, for instance, you finish the Coke in about 40 minutes. But the container, the can for the Coke lasts forever. You go and buy something. Sometimes you go in a shop, you see things in a glass jar, and the jar lasts longer than the food that it is in. So never buy anything that in which the container or the packaging lasts longer than the contents itself. So these are some of the things that we have to change. Our lifestyles have to change. For instance, eating meat, and a lot of Indian gentlemen, Indian community are vegetarians. Eating meat, according to my Japanese friends, contribute to 20% of climate change. Because, for instance, if you eat beef, the beef, you have to clear the ground for the beef, so that destroys the ecology of the land. You have to grow corn for the beef, so that you have to use greater cut for the land. Then when the beef is slaughtered, it gives out gases as well. So eating beef contributes to 20% of the climate change. And so we have to change our lifestyles. We ourselves have to change our habits, our physical habits, our eating habits, and our emotional habits have to change. And so this is what I think we have to do. But it's a long way. I mean, how do you tell people, you can't eat meat, you can't do this, you can't do that? It's beyond me, because I'm just an architect, and we're not particularly powerful as people. We just do what we can by example.
Yes, sir, that was very insightful. And you have inspired a lot of people like through this lecture and through all of your work. And we might see a lot of sustainable development in architecture soon in the future. And I'm also a vegetarian, so yeah, I'm doing my small part. I'm doing my small part to the environment.
Well, you do your bit for the world, then.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Sir, as the student of architecture myself, I wanted to know how you balance function with the aesthetic appeal of a building.
Can you answer the question? Ask the question again. How do I balance what?
How do you balance function with the aesthetic aspect of the building?
With the
Aesthetic aspect of the building, sir.
oh,
The aesthetic appeal.
that is an important question. You see, in design, you have to achieve 5 factors. First of all, as you say, function, it must work. If the building doesn't work, if the circulation isn't effective, if it doesn't function well, then it's a useless piece of hardware. So function is very important. So when you design, it has to work. Secondly, it must meet criteria. It must be done within cost, within time, to the quality that's expected. It must meet authority requirements. Your local government authority, we have a lot of rules and regulations that you have to keep. You have to comply. So the second is the compliance to criteria. The third is that as an architect, you're an artist. You have to make your buildings as aesthetically beautiful as possible without being overly gratuitous. And so it has to be beautiful. Then the fourth is green. So green is only one of a multitude of 5 criteria, and that it is not the only one. So the other three criteria you have to meet. But the final one is the one that is, I think, the most important as an architect, that you must make people happy. If people are not happy in your building, no matter how green it is, it's like living in a prison. And so the other day I was in New York, somebody pointed out a group of buildings designed by a very famous architect who got a Pritzker Prize. And he said, that's a green building. And I said, that's god awful ugly. So a green building doesn't mean it's beautiful. Just because it's green doesn't make it beautiful. So you have to make your buildings, and it doesn't make people happy. And so, you have to look at meet these five criteria, which is function, five factors: function, meet criteria, beautiful, green, and make people happy. And so when I design, I don't, we already know how to make buildings green. It's second nature to us, pardon the pun. And so the first thing we ask is that we look at this project and this program. How do we make people happy? How do we make the users happy, the visitors happy? And there are many ways to do this. And that if you're able to achieve this in your architecture, in what you design, what you build, your whole purpose in life as an architect is fulfilled because you made other people happy. And so that's very important. And so these are the five factors: function, criteria, greenness, aesthetics, happiness, and well-being. So these are the key factors for design.
So, as a follow-up of the previous question, who or is there a specific incident that wanted to make you became an eco-architect?
Oh, what an interesting question. By accident, I went to Cambridge back in the 70s to work on a project called the Autonomous House Project. The Autonomous House Project is an idea invented by Buckminster Fuller, or he mooted by Buckminster Fuller. He said that what happens if you build a house which is independent of the city's utilities? That means it doesn't need energy from the city, doesn't need water from the city, doesn't sewage connect to the city, doesn't require food from the city, and doesn't require technology from the city. And so this was a project at Cambridge University that I was asked to join. But after 6 months in the project, in those days, we didn't have the engineering support. So I told my supervisor, or my boss, that I don't think I can carry on with this project. I'd like to do work on ecological design, which is the bigger picture. Unless you sort out the bigger framework in which you do the house design, then you have no direction, you have no focus. And so he said, okay, nice man that he is. He said, we'll make you into a research student. You write your PhD on ecological design and planning, and that I give you permission to leave our unit. So that's what happened. So back in 1972, I started to work on ecological design for a doctorate. So by 1974, when I finished, the doctorate became my life's agenda. And so that's what happened. Since from 1974 onwards, I've been trying to implement ecological architecture. That's nearly more than 30, 40 years ago. And that's what happened. And now what I try to do is to list an agenda of different things that I had to cover in my lifetime for ecological design. But there's so much to do that I haven't been able to finish the agenda. So I hope that I can finish, or I can do as much as I can before I start pushing daisies.
Sir, so that was very insightful. Sir, you have worked on some really fascinating and awe-striking architectures like the National Library of Singapore, that is really amazing, the Vancouver waterfront in Canada, AI Asima in Kuwait, and so on. So, sir, personally, which one of these projects has been the most satisfying one, and can you tell us a bit of the design planning that went behind it?
Well, as I said, we all start with the green infrastructure, how to lay this out on the site, and the green infrastructure depends on the ecology surrounding the site. So that's how we start. And then all the other 5 factors, we hold them in our heads and see how much of these we can fulfill in our design. And we look at the site and the program. We think about what can we do here to make visitors happy, to create unusual aesthetic space for them. And so this is what architecture is all about. It is not just shaping a building gratuitously, but it's to try and make people happy. And so I'm not sure which is the most fulfilling buildings, but usually the latest projects I'm working on are the most interesting and the most challenging because we try and innovate with every scheme. Innovation is actually the key to success in anything that you do, whether it is in the end of business. If you look at Apple's innovating all the time. If you look at any other business, innovation, continuous innovation is what makes you successful. And sometimes the innovation is not just in hardware; it can be in the process, it can be in the strategy. And so right now, during the recession, it's extremely difficult to survive. We have 51 people in the office and 51 mouths to feed. And so where are we going to get the money from? So we have to innovate. You have to think of new ways to keep the office going. Now, let me tell you something. If you're an architecture student, then I suggest that you think again. And this is very serious. Why you want to be an architect? Because being an architect is a very stressful life. It's stressful for 5 reasons. First one is that it is cash flow driven. In other words, you have to do the design first before people pay you. You don't get many clients who pay you fees in advance. And some clients, will give you such a mean, scheduled payment, or some clients, after you finish the job, they don't even pay you. And so it is a cash flow driven business. So that is the first reason that makes being an architect very stressful. Secondly, it is very delivery intensive. That means every day, if you have a large firm like ours or medium large, you have half a dozen things you have to deliver on that day. If you don't deliver, somebody's going to get really annoyed with you. So it's very delivery intensive, and you have to control. You have to make sure that everybody delivers. And so nobody can slack. And in your head, you have to know what other things to deliver for a particular day. Otherwise, you get a funny phone call, a nasty phone call from a client, or somebody you get annoyed, or something happens. So the first factor is it is cash flow driven, it is delivery intensive. The third is that you're doing multiple management business functions in one person. Now, let's say if you're in the car business or an insurance business, the person who manages the insurance company isn't a person who does the selling, isn't a person who does the financial, isn't a person who does all the documentation. But you as an architect, you have to do everything. You have to get the business, you have to market, you have to do the production, you have to design it, you have to deliver it on time, you have to supervise it, you do everything. That makes it so you're doing multiple business functions at the same time. And so, delivery intensive, it is capital. Then it is people come and go, says, "Oh, I'm tired of your company. I'm pissed off with you," or I don't get on so and so. I don't like him, so I want to leave a company. So you're always constant, and then you have conflicts, and you have people differences. Then you have to let people grow, and that give the opportunity for the careers to develop within the company. And so it is, it is a people business. And so with all these factors, think again, do you want to be an architect?
Yes, sir, definitely.
So if you want to be an architect, then you must be able to accept all these stresses and have the passion to live with these stresses. Otherwise, it's much easier to become, something else. You're going to sell motor car hubcaps or be a quantity surveyor or something else, A lot of my friends, after they leave architecture school, don't do architecture. Some of them go to IT business, some would go into management, some would go into all sorts of business. Nothing wrong with that, because some of you become politicians, because architecture is such a broad background that you're trained to do a lot of things, and gives you a very good training to do something. I mean, for instance, the former mayor of Curitiba is an architect. In some of the places I know in the world, politicians and senior people in the government are architects. In Singapore, Tony Tan is an architect. And so in architecture, it gives you a very broad background to look at things that other people do not look at. And so think again, when you leave architecture school, you don't have to be an architect. You could be something else, that you could be. Now, I'm going to end in a minute because this is Saturday and my family's shouting and screaming downstairs. And so,
Okay.
now I'm going to tell you a story that somebody told me maybe about 30 plus years ago that changed my life. I'm going to tell you the story. If it changed your life, it helps you, I'll be very glad. Now, the story, the focus, the moral or the principle of the story is focus. Focus means you cannot be everything to everybody. You can, you have 100, maybe 20, 40 friends. You cannot be nice to all of them. Maybe you have half a dozen that you're very close to. Like your companion that you're with. You cannot have all the women in your life, with you. You can just, take one or two, or take one, probably, and just be very close to that person. And so focus means you cannot be 100% do everything. You cannot be a Top Gun, a fighter pilot. You cannot be a monk in Tibet. You cannot be a classical pianist. You cannot be an Olympic athlete all at the same time, unless you're a Superman. But you can do one or two and do it extremely well. And that is the purpose. Focus on one or two things that is important to you that you can do extremely well, better than anybody else, better in the whole world. And so the whole story is about focus, all right? Now, as a metaphor for this story, it is based on the life of a tennis player. Now, there is a very, very famous Swedish tennis player called Bjorn Borg. I don't know if you've heard of him. He won Wimbledon many times, Bjorn Borg, and until he retired. Was beaten by John McEnroe, and he retired. But he won Wimbledon many times. And the story uses him as a metaphor. So the story starts like this. Bjorn Borg was playing tennis. He was about 14, 15 years old in a school courts. Then this tennis player walked past and saw him play. And he said, oh, this is a young man that has potential. So walking the course, introduced himself. He says, I'm so-and-so, I'm a tennis trainer, and I will make you into a world champion. And Bjorn says, well, I'm only about 15, 16, I'm playing 5 games today. I won 3, I lost 2. How are you going to make me into a world champion? And he said, I look at the way you play, and I think you have potential. Your left stroke, okay, has potential. Has potential to become unbeatable, but it's not unbeatable now. Your service isn't very good. Your right stroke isn't very good. Now, of course, that's the grossification of what tennis is about. But he said that on average, you're not particularly good, but your left stroke has the potential to become unbeatable. And what I'll do as a trainer is to take your potential, your left stroke, and make it unbeatable. I'll train you until your left stroke remains unbeatable. Everything else, your service, your right stroke, bring it up to average level. When your left stroke is unbeatable and everything is at average level, you will become a world champion. And so that's what happened. So Bjorn Borg became a world champion. And then Bjorn Borg said to his trainer, I'm now a world champion. Why do I need you? So the trainer says, well, you need me if you want to continue to become a world champion, because your left stroke, even though unbeatable, will not remain unbeatable forever. Your competitors will know the tricks of your left stroke and beat your left stroke. So what I'll do as a trainer is I'll make sure your unbeatable left stroke remains unbeatable. Then everything else we brought up to average level, and make sure you improve a little bit every day. So in this way, you remain a world champion. So that is the principle. The idea is that Ask yourself, what is your left stroke? Once you know your left stroke, then make it unbeatable. Once you make it beatable, then everything else you don't do so well, try and make this as improve on this every day, so that in this way you become a world champion. Now that is only because if you want to be a world champion. Now this is a story I told to many people, I told to many students. I get 4 types of reaction. The first reaction is from this boy or this man who came to work for me as an intern. He was already a man. He was already had a degree. He was working as a merchant banker in New York, and he was, was making a lot of money. He came to work for me for a pittance as an intern. So I said, here's a man who gave up his whole life because he wants to be an architect. He went to architectural school and went to intern for me. And then I said, I better keep an eye on him, to see how he's doing. And so after a while, I said, oh dear, we're in trouble because he cannot draw. Here's a guy who gave up his life as a merchant banker to study architecture. He cannot draw. He cannot draw very well anyway. So I took him into my room and I told him this story. He got very angry. Angry not with me, but with himself. He walked out of the room. So I said, oh dear, I might have disappointed him. But he came back the next day and said to me, Ken, my forte is urban design. That's part of what he does as an architect, urban design. And he did, when he went back to school, he did so well, he almost got the RIB Sterling Medal, for students. So that's the first reaction I get. Here's a guy who knows his left stroke, who wants to become a world champion, and goes out and make himself into a world champion. Now, the second response is from this lady architect, who's a matured architect. She wasn't a particularly good designer. She was a particularly good project manager, and she was, in her late 30s and early, So I told her this story, and she said, Ken, what is my left stroke? I said, I don't know. You have to find out for yourself. Ask your friends, ask your teachers, ask your colleagues. And so here's a person who wants to be a world champion, but doesn't know her left stroke. The third reaction is from this girl who is from Australia. She left architecture school and she got married straight away. She married a much older man who was a sculptor who made her a sex slave, And she got so unhappy, disillusioned with love and with life. She divorced him and she went to UK to get all this unpleasantness out of her system. So she flew, after a few years, she flew back to Australia, and she was, had a stopover in Kuala Lumpur. So I took her out for a meal, and I told her this story because I thought it might help her. And she said to me, Ken, I don't want to be a world champion. I just want to fall in love and have a good life. I said, that's fine. Not everybody wants to be a world champion. So these are the 3 reactions that I get. So now this story is for you. Go back and ask yourself, do I want to be a world champion? If you want to be a world champion, then find out what is your left stroke in architecture and do it better than anybody else. Not just your colleagues, not just in India, not just in Southeast Asia, but better than anybody else in the world. And then you become a world champion. And so this is what this is what's important. But if you don't want to do that, you want to have a good life, you want to have a relaxed life, you want to fall in love and be happy, nothing wrong with that. Because you cannot have everything for everybody. So go ahead and do that. Now, one last advice I'm going to give you, because you're a student, is that I call this the Gary story. I started business back in the 70s, late 70s. And I have a cousin called Gary from Singapore who comes out to Malaysia every few months. And because I'm very close to my mother, we have a very close relationship. And we would have dinner together and we talk about business, talk about work, talk about life. And we talk in the early morning. And so one of the visits, I said to him, Gary, if I don't get any business, I have to give up. I'll close shop. So Gary, we talk about what I do. And he said, Ken, his advice to me is this: go and learn marketing. Marketing doesn't guarantee you success, but it's a systematic approach to getting business.
Yes,
So I went to the, so I said, where can I learn? He says, go to the local institute of management. So whichever city you're in, there is an institute of management. And marketing, it courses, maybe about 3 weeks. I took a marketing course 2 nights a week, and I applied it to architectural business. It changed my life overnight because I suddenly realized that, all my colleagues, all my competitors, all the older guys who've been around for a long time, they knew how to do marketing, but they learned it intuitively. It took them years to learn intuitively. Whereas I
yes.
learned it in 3 weeks in a course,
Weeks.
systematically.
Yes.
On top of that, if it's systematic, if something goes wrong, you know how to react, how to take action. The guy, if he's learning intuitively, something goes wrong, his marketing is successful, he says, "Oh, what did I do? How did I do it last year?" So it's an intuition response. Whereas you are systematic, you understand. So I implemented marketing. So I met up with my cousin Gary again a few months later, and he said, "How are you doing, Ken?" And I said, "Gary, fine. Marketing is great. I applied it, and it's becoming successful. I'm getting business." And they said, "What's your problem?" So we talked to the early hours in the morning. And I said, "Gary, I can't manage." So Gary says, "Go and learn management." So I went back to school, attended a course on management. I learned leadership. I learned, control. I learned direction. I learned delegation. I learned, all sorts of things to do with management. So, I applied it, management. So I saw a few months later, I saw Gary. Gary said, "How's business, Ken?" I said, "Marketing's fine." "Management okay?" "Management's fine." So I said, "What's your problem?" So we talked about early morning. And I said, "I'm not making money." So I said, "Go back to management school and learn finance, learn income tax,
Finance.
learn financial control, learn all sorts of things. And so I learned finance. I'm making sales, management market. So I meet up with Gary again 3 months later, a few months later. And Gary said, "Everything all right, Ken?" I said, "Marketing's fine, getting better." "How's it managing?" "Management's fine, getting better." "How's making money?" I said, "Making some money, not for a lot, but it's making some money." So we talked in the early morning, and he said, "What's your problem, Ken?" I said, "I'm not happy. I'm not happy." He said, "Go back to church."
Go back to church.
So anyway, that's the moral of the story.
Uh,
Well, so when you leave architecture school, focus on your left hand. Find out what is your left hand if you want to be a world champion. Next is that if you want to set up business on your own, learn management. Go and do an MBA. Now, the best MBA course to attend is called Leading a Professional Service Firm, which is a 1 week long in Harvard Business School. They run this course twice a year. One is in July and one is September, and they teach you everything in a nutshell in a week. Now, if that if that enhances your thirst for management, then do an MBA, because once you do that, you can do anything in your life. You know, And so without that, because your school doesn't teach you how to do business, your school doesn't teach you how to manage your company, the school doesn't teach you how to delegate, the school doesn't teach you financial controls. You have to learn, I have to learn over myself, and you have to learn. So these are the two things I give advice to you. I hope it's useful to you.
yes, sir.
Okay? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. This
Bye.
is like the yes, sir. This is the best advice I've ever given by someone.
Okay.
And so
Well,
I really, really wish, I really, really wish like we could have this session in person someday.
yes,
I
sure.
really wish. Sir.
Okay, good.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
You're welcome. All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye, sir.